All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Omari, Salisbury, Converge Media, and I'm joined with my partner in crime in times like this, Mike Davis of the South Seattle Emerald. How are you, Mike?
I'm good. How you doing, Ollie?
Man, I'm doing all right. I'll be honest with you. This is this thing about the city budget, man. You turn your head away for a few days and you come back and ta-da.
Politics have been interesting, man, all summer, all the way up until now. It's never been this interesting in my life, but woo.
Yeah, and so as usual, when we dig into the Seattle City Council, we turn to the whiz, to the guru. This guy even has a website. This name, Seattle City Council Insight, SCCinsight.com. I'm talking about the answer man, Kevin Schofield. What's up, Kev?
Low expectations. Thanks for always leading with low expectations there that I can't possibly live up to. Yeah.
Hey, no, you got it. And so before we get started here, we're also doing an AMA. And so people don't know what an AMA is. That means ask me anything. Now, about the budget and stuff, though, you know what I'm saying? Like some stuff we're not gonna go to. So anything about the budget topic in City Hall and how things are moving through and some of our thoughts and everything else, feel free to go and put a question over there in the comments. And throughout tonight's show, we'll try to get to those and answer as many things as we can. And that being said, Kev, we've got a few different things. I know you wrote an article here, and surprisingly enough, well, really not surprisingly, man, this thing had legs. It was a lot of different people from different aspects, from city government, from community organizations, concerned citizens. Everybody's like, man, did you read what Kevin wrote as analysis about what's going on? Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. The guru, the whiz kid. Everybody's looking for answers.
It's weird because nobody talked to me all day about it. So
I'm just more accessible, maybe.
I'm always glad to hear people are talking about it and reading this stuff. So yeah, it's been an interesting 2 days. Yesterday, the council's budget chair, Teresa Mosqueda, ruled out what they call their balancing package. Right, so they get a proposed budget from the mayor back in the end of September, and then the council takes that, and that proposed budget is balanced, or at least it's supposed to be. It's almost entirely balanced this year, and then the city council takes that and they go try to figure out all the changes they want to make, and then it's a budget chair's job to go figure out what everybody's priorities are in the council, and then make a balancing package that incorporates as many of those things as possible and still balances, because under state law, the budget has to balance, right? And so that's what she rolled out. And just so, kind of looking ahead, the next step is they've got one more round. They spent all day today discussing that. And they got one more round of possible changes that they have to make, but any changes that a council member wants to make from here, their individual change has to balance. So if they want to spend more money on this, they have to take money away from something else or find a new revenue source or something like that. So that, at every moment along the way, every single change they make, they keep this thing balanced, right? Because if it ever gets out of balance, then they're in trouble.
And that's the law. It has to be balanced.
State law says a city has to have a balanced budget, right? In fact, that's why in June they had to go back and like redo the budget, because their budget forecast told them they were hundreds of millions of dollars out of balance, and they were required to go fix that right away. Right. So now they've got a balanced budget, and so not everything that they discussed over the last couple of weeks got in there, but a lot did. But first, what happened is last week they got some good news, which is 3 times a year the city budget office goes and kind of forecasts what revenues are going to look like, and the first 2 times they did that over the course of this year, it got bad in April, it got worse in June, but this time it actually got a little bit better. This time they're like, hey, actually we've got about $32 million about $36 million more coming in this year in 2020 than we thought we were going to get, and about 32 million, something like that, next year. So you got a little bit more money to play with. And like, woo, yay! We don't, we can go spend money, right, without having to go take money away from something else, right? Because that's always the hard part of this. So that was some good news for them. And then the other good news last week was Proposition 1 passed, right? The Transportation Benefit District passed. So they got about $30 million a year out of that. That's more money they can spend on transportation. So that was more good news for things. There's a lot of kind of earmarked projects that they wanted to do in council member, district-based council members' neighborhoods, that they're like, oh yeah, good, we can spend some money and go take care of that, that bike lane or that metro route and things like that. So some good things came out of that. And then sort of the really interesting sort of big pot of money was $100 million sitting in the mayor's Equitable Communities Initiative, right? Where she said she wanted, the mayor organized this task force to start working on a plan for how they're going to spend that $100 million. And over the past couple of weeks, as the council has been having public conversations about this, they proposed, cutting about $10 million of that. I thought, okay, that's pretty mild. I wonder if it'll stay that way. It didn't stay that way. In the budget, the balanced package that they rolled out this week, they cut that $100 million down to they cut it by $70 million down to $30 million.
And I'm going to stop you right there, Kevin, because we're going to have a bit of conversation about that right there.
Yeah.
So we're going to circle back around to that. And before we do though, I wanted to hit on a few other things here real quick.
Sure.
I took some headers out of the article that you had, and we'll just start off something here. And I always tell the people in West Seattle that are watching and things like that, they're like, man, you got to ask these guys about this bridge. Let me bring this up here. SDOT.
Yeah. So SDOT. This is definitely one of the places where you can see the effect of the district-based city council system, right? Where every city council member is out there, pushing for SDOT projects in their district, right? So, beefing up the Metro Route 7 corridor in South Seattle, the Route 44 corridor that goes from Ballard over to the University District, a couple other ones. Councilmember Peterson has been pushing hard on more money for bridge maintenance because we should be spending according to the city auditor, anywhere between like $34 to $100 million a year on bridge maintenance, and we're spending. The mayor upped it, and so next year her proposed budget has 12, right? And Peterson managed to get another 4 in there, so it's like 16 now.
So how are they maintaining this stuff?
Well, they're
just not.
They're doing what's called deferred maintenance. They're not doing a lot of the maintenance that they should be doing on our bridges. And a lot of the major maintenance stuff is getting done. When important structural pieces wear out, they take care of those. But a lot of the minor stuff, things like cracking concrete. Well, and cracking concrete can be okay, and it's actually here in Seattle it's not quite so bad because it doesn't get below freezing that often here in Seattle, right? The worry with cracking concrete is water is going to get in there and then it's going to freeze, and it basically makes the cracks bigger.
Frost wedging.
Right? Yeah. It's in the Northeast and places where it really gets super cold. They call it, that's how they get these frost heaves on the sidewalk, where they get major portions of the sidewalk just pushing up. It's because the water gets in there and freezes and it just pushes it all up. So, we benefit a little bit from the weather, the fact that we don't get quite as extremes of kind of heat and cold here. But there's a lot of, and so they don't always do all that minor maintenance.
Is it because maintenance isn't like sexy and it isn't like headline grabbing?
Yeah,
is that why there's no money going into maintenance?
Yeah, that's right. It's a lot of money. You can spend $100 million a lot of different ways, right? And rather than on fixing cracks in concrete and fixing repainting handrails on pedestrian bridges and things like that, right? And long term, it's all stuff that should be done, but it's really hard to justify that. Looking at just even with the transportation, thing, building out more sidewalks or building out protected bike lanes. Like, do you want another mile of protected bike lanes, or do you want to spend $1 million on minor maintenance?
Mike,
I can tell you which one people go lobby for, right? Lobby for the protected bike lanes. There's no major, advocacy group out there showing up at City Hall, calling into the public comment session saying, you need to fully fund minor maintenance, right? It's just not happening.
I was saying, Mike, that when you talk about them putting money into the bus service, it's something that typically when we've talked, those are things you like to hear.
Yeah, definitely. But those are things that's going to help you get votes. If you're really out there and you're campaigning for the community and you want more, that's a lot more attractive than fixing a crack in a bridge.
Yeah, and by the way, with the Seattle Transportation Benefit District that just got approved last week, a huge portion of that money goes to added Metro bus routes. So that's the kind of thing like voters here in Seattle, to your guys' point, are more than willing to tax themselves to pay for more bus routes. So that's a great thing.
Right. And now something I saw this research, I'm sure you saw it as well, Kevin. It said that 45% of respondents, the EMC, they did it, 45% of respondents said that homelessness was their number one concern or issue. I see here in your article, you talk about homeless response and replacing the navigation team. Yeah.
So, it's certainly a big deal in the city. And as we know over the summer and, really in some ways for years before that, there's been a big fight between the city council and the mayor's office over the navigation team, whether there should be police on it, whether whether removing encampments should be sort of the method of last resort, or sort of the thing that this team goes and does. And they have now, as of a few weeks ago, sort of come to agreement on a new model for this replacement for the navigation team that doesn't have police involved, and the actual direct outreach out among encampments is done by third-party outreach groups. And there's now going to be a team of 8 people in the city, what Councilmember Morales is calling the Hope Team, and homeless outreach, and I forget what the P&E stand for, but their job is to support those outreach organizations and to coordinate city resources for things like trash pickup and all the other things, storing somebody's belongings if they need their belongings stored. So it's kind of a new model, and everybody seems, people are still a little tenuous. They're like, yeah, okay, we think this is going to work out. But
was the police the only issue that people really had before on the navigation team, that there was police on the team, or were there other structural issues with navigation?
Yeah, there were really 3 big issues. One was having the police be part of that team. They thought really eroded the trust with homeless individuals that outreach was trying to build in order to get them to come inside, right? That they, it really, scared people off and pushed people not to engage with the navigation team when they saw, armed police officers show up, right? So that was part 1. Part 2 was that, it just felt like the team's job was removing homeless encampments, right? Rather than trying to help people. And so, we're pushing people around the city, and particularly during the COVID pandemic, the CDC has put out guidance that said that, we should not be pushing homeless people around the city because we're probably going to be spreading COVID by doing that. Right. And then sort of the third part was that the navigation team kind of had a monopoly on emergency shelter spaces, right?
Mhm.
So, they were keeping a running tally of where they were. They could kind of reserve them, particularly in the navigation center shelter and, a couple of other shelters that the city, was mostly or if not entirely funding. And that meant that all these other third party organizations like Reach, who are doing outreach, couldn't get access to any of those shelter beds, right? So the only, and there were many days where the only organization that could actually offer somebody shelter was the navigation team. And so that really hurt the performance and the ability to help people of these different outreach organizations. So getting that navigation team out of the field itself and leaving the outreach to these other organizations, but have this replacement team be able to still sort of coordinate, okay, where are the shelter spaces? How can we make that information available to outreach providers so that they can really make these kinds of offers? The bet is that's a better way to organize this.
What will it look like now? So when we're seeing encampments that are like right next to the playground in Holly Park, or if you go to like Bitter Lake Community Center and there's encampments right by the play structures where the kids play, what will these new methods look like for encampments like that?
Well, so it means that Reach or Chief Seattle Club or one of the other outreach providers who's on contract with the city can go out there and talk to them, and and they'll probably visit a bunch of times, because that's what happens. It usually takes multiple times, particularly with individuals who've been experiencing chronic homelessness, to build up a level of trust with an outreach provider to be able to accept offers of help. But when they get them to the point where somebody's willing to come inside, right, that those outreach providers can call this city team and say, hey, I've got somebody who's ready to come inside, right? But they only want a tiny home village home, right? Or they're only they're Native American, and so they want to go to one of the shelters that the Chief Seattle Club is running, or something like that. And this team can work them and say, yeah, okay, we can do that. And do they have resources? Do they have belongings that they need to store when they come inside? Like a tent and things like that. And and then the city team can organize getting city people out there to gather up and store their resources for them.
So right? No more destruction of their property is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, but okay. So I mean, we got to spin it on the side though. So what happens to the people who are like, nah, I'm comfortable here. I don't want to go. I don't want to leave anywhere. I mean, so then what happens? Is the third party trained to forcefully remove people? That
part that's one of the parts that they're still working out the exact details of how it's going to do. Everybody, in the print, they've written out between the mayor's office and the council a set of principles. Oh, and the outreach providers, all of them sort of sat down at the table and wrote out a set of principles of here's the principles that we think should homeless outreach should involve. And it does in fact say in there are going to be circumstances in which we really do need to remove an encampment, right? Where somebody just is in a place where we just can't have them, and they need to go. And so they're still working on the exact protocol for that, or at least if they've worked it out, I haven't seen it yet. But just a recognition that is a case. Everybody wants to work to make that as rare as possible, and it's not the thing that we lead with, right? That they lead with, let's do outreach and let's offer them shelter and services and things that will help them. And let's only go to that, to removing an encampment, if everything else fails, right? That is our method of last resort on this.
That makes sense. I guess it's just tough for me when we're talking about playgrounds and we have encampments right where our kids are supposed to play, especially when you look at the specific communities where these things exist and the communities where these things do not exist. But a larger question I have is, what is the timeline on all of this? When will the navigation team be gone, and when will these community partners be up and ready to go? And will we have a gap in time where there's no nav team and the community partners have not been funded?
Yeah, so the NAB team is gone, right? There are no longer police on it. They are getting reorganized even as we speak in HSD, in the Human Services Department, into this new HOPE team right now. And it's going to be a little shift because they have had people doing outreach on that team, and those people are going to be doing either different jobs in this team, or they're going to go find a different job somewhere else, either with the city or maybe with one of these providers if they want to keep doing outreach. And then they're going to have to go hire some different expertise into this team to do more of the coordination work that they've been doing. So that team is still a little bit in flux. They've added a little bit more funding into the 2020 budget just to finish off this year with the outreach providers, and they're definitely putting more money into that in the 2021 budget, right? And I don't know how long it takes those teams to hire new people, so to scale up their effort. That's a really good and important question. But the sense I get is that funding is not going to be a problem with this. It's really the other logistics of getting the right people into the right places to go do this work.
All right. So let's move along here. And by the way, for people who are watching, this is our budget update show. Mike Davis of South Seattle Emerald and Kevin Schofield of SCCinsight.com. Just kind of talking around the budget and what's happening here, and a surprising kind of change of hearts down there in City Hall. So also at AMA, that means ask me anything about the budget. So just go ahead and put that in the comments, and we'll try to get to those. Next one here. And by the way, we're saving the BIPOC 100 million, all that for last. See,
and SPD, right?
Yeah, you got to keep people watching. You see what I'm saying? So we're saving all that stuff.
We got a big crescendo at the end coming up. Yeah,
that's it. So let's go into this one, Kevin. Climate change and the Green New Deal.
Yeah. So 2 years ago, the city council passed this Green New Deal, or was it last year? It was a while back. They passed. I guess it was summer 2019. Time is flying. And one of the things that the council put into the budget for 2020 was hiring in the city government a staff person who could actually support the Green New Deal Oversight Board that the council approved. And that is sort of a precursor to going in and having the city council and the mayor nominate people to that Green New Deal Oversight Board. But early in 2020, when the COVID thing hit and the budget crisis hit, the city put in a hiring freeze. And so nobody ever got hired for that position, right? And then kind of as they got later in the year, that money to hire that person basically got cut, and it got refunded, redirected elsewhere. So all through this year, they never hired a staff person to support the Green New Deal Oversight Board. So there is no oversight board right now. Nobody has been appointed to it. There's no staff person to run it. And the mayor's proposed budget didn't restore that.
Well, right? let me jump in here real quick, Kevin. I mean, because Green New Deal just kind of sounds ambiguous. Yeah. I mean, like what are some of the key points in this Green New Deal?
Yeah. So, as the city council kind of envisioned it, and they passed this resolution around this last year, there was a number of different kind of aspects of it. Everything from looking at kind of transportation policy and, within the city fleet, reducing the size of the fossil fuel powered vehicles that the city uses, encouraging more, commuting, to looking at green building standards and energy efficiency in buildings, things like, what do we do about getting people off of heating oil and potentially getting buildings off of natural gas, right? So the whole sort of wide variety of both, city procedures and city operations, but also, broader city policies about, how we make this a sustainable city that, eventually gets, if not carbon neutral, well, at the very least carbon neutral, if not, carbon negative over time. And they said they want an oversight board to go and, provide guidance to the city for how to go about setting these kinds of policies and procedures and operations around the city. But, like I said, none of that happened this year. But the city council has restored funding for that position, and also for for a climate advisor position. So, a domain expert to be on city staff to help, kind of internally with guiding these kinds of policies. So, those are a couple of things that they're doing in that space.
Right. And let me see here. It looks like, is that Erica? That is Erica. Hi, Erica.
Hey, Erica.
Hello. I just got off talking to the urbanist moments ago.
We'll be much cooler.
Yeah, we were just talking about drug policy.
I will not. I will be as nerdy as ever. It's as good as it gets. Yeah.
So this is Erica Barnett from publicola.com. Erica, so you've joined us here, and Kevin was just kind of breaking down the climate change and Green New Deal around the budget. What are your thoughts around this climate change and Green New Deal part of the budget that the council has proposed?
Kevin, remind me which part you were talking about. Is this the climate change advisor?
Yeah, the climate change advisor and the staff person for the Green New Deal oversight committee, which never got set up, and all that.
Yeah, well, that's a good example of a program that the mayor cut funding for, even though it was obviously a council priority and was once a city priority. I haven't heard much pushback from the mayor on that, but yeah, I mean, if you're going to have a Green New Deal, you need to actually staff it, and so the council is kind of I think in a lot, and I don't know what all specifics you guys have discussed, but I think there's a lot of little small ads here and there that are going to add up to kind of picking away at some of the mayor's policy priorities and restoring some of their own. But there are obviously some really big ticket budget items that they've changed up as well, and maybe you guys have already discussed those. We're
just getting there. We're saving the best stuff for last.
Cool.
And did you have anything on this, Mike?
They kind of covered it. When I read through it, I was really kind of curious because I seen that position, but there was also like 2 or 3 other positions. So it seems like we went from nothing to like 3 positions, and it felt like it came from nowhere. But as Kevin mentioned, this is legislation from 2019 that is now they're finally going to make a move on.
Yeah, and in the grander scheme of things, Seattle city government is 11,000 people. So 3 is a rounding error. So it's not like they're making a huge investment in this. This is just little stuff on the fringes that is a good start, right? They'll be able to go really appoint a whole oversight board for a Green New Deal now, which they have been stuck and not being able to do. So it's a starting point, but it's certainly a long ways away from really having a true Green New Deal here in the city.
All right, but you're saying it's America?
Well, I was going to say my sort of pick for the one that's kind of one position they added back or added that jumped out at me, and it's something I've been following, but that Teresa Mosqueda added a position for a really pretty obscure position in the Human Services Department to basically help them keep up with their contracts. And the reason I bring this up is because the homelessness division has just been hemorrhaging people, and I think they're down to like 24 people now from about 50, maybe 2 years ago. And there's a real risk that they won't be able to get all their contracts out the door at the end of the year, which means that people won't get services, which means that that literally agencies won't get their money that they need to provide services at the end of the year because there's just no one there dealing with there's not no one, but there's very few people there dealing with the contracts. So that was something that that Teresa added that I think is, it's not getting a lot of attention, but it was really important for those folks.
Erica, so, you follow the whole, regional homeless authority more than I do. Obviously, the fact that that's getting spun up, is having some effect on HSD's ability to keep their own homeless team together. As these people don't know what's going to happen. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what's going on with that?
Yeah. So I think the latest that I am aware of, so the director of that, or the CEO of that organization, which is like a kind of mega, county-wide, all the cities in the county, plus Seattle, including Seattle, homelessness authority. They were supposed to hire the director in September, and now I think it's been pushed out. I want to say as far as February. And so as that happens, the whole timeline just keeps getting pushed further and further forward. But Meanwhile, the city has all these people that work for them and work on homelessness and that don't have guaranteed jobs in that new entity. So that's sort of why you're seeing so much attrition, because people are leaving. They're taking other jobs because they don't know what their future holds. And so I think the longer that goes on and the longer there's just that uncertainty about when this thing is actually going to get up and running and how much money it's going to have. And, there's a new tax that just that's coming into effect, a new countywide tax that a bunch of cities, small suburban cities opted out of. So with all this kind of upheaval, I mean, there's this very real question of like, who is going to be taking care of the homelessness, mission in the city in the meantime, because that's a pretty big lag from September to February.
And just, bringing it back to the 2021 budget for the city, at some point when this thing is really up and running, the city stops, going through the whole sort of detailed budgeting process itself and just basically writes a big check to this homeless authority for a lot of this, right? So, all the, deciding which programs to fund and all this stuff becomes their problem. And I'm curious as to how much the city council is going to want to let go of that, right? I think they're going to still want to micromanage a lot of it, but we'll see.
Well, I think that's a departmental thing too, because you'll remember that the navigation team and all that outreach stuff, that was the mayor and the human services department who basically insisted that this is the one thing that we need to keep in the city of Seattle, no matter what, which never really made a whole lot of sense. But yeah, so they're now working to revamp the navigation team, which is going to stay with the city, whatever it becomes. And that's the team that used to go out and remove encampments and do outreach and stuff like that. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I don't think the city, is necessarily really going to want to give it up, but they've kind of committed to.
And we shall see. We're going to take a quick break right now, a 1 minute break. When we come back, we still have the Seattle Fire Department, the Seattle Police Department, and of course that $100 million in the BIPOC investment. Be right back. Hey, what's up? Omari Salisbury here with the reminder I'll be talking with Joyce Taylor from King 5 later this month. It's an online fundraiser for the Seattle Association of Black Journalists called Black Voices Matter. Behind the Lines with me, Omari Salisbury. We're going to talk about inspiration, covering the demands for change in Seattle and what that looks like for journalists going forward. It's Saturday, November 14th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Tickets are only $10, $5 for students, and you can find that link by checking out whereweconverge.com and on our social media at WWConverge on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you want to learn more about the SABJ, which you should, head to sabjonline.com. I got to thank Bobby Skills for having me sound so smooth. Like I really don't sound like that in real life. He did some audio mixing or something on there, man. Welcome back. It's our City of Seattle budget update show. And man, I've got a lot of esteemed colleagues here. Mike Davis from the South Seattle Emerald, Kevin Schofield from SCCinsight.com, and Erica C. I see the C there. Erica C. Barnett from publiccola.com. Next up over here, Kevin, and this was let me say, here they are, Seattle Fire Department. And, I had Chief Scoggins on the show this morning, and Chief Scoggins talked about Health One, and talked about their goal in the future to be able to have a Health One, I guess, response unit at every battalion in Seattle. Not quite there yet. They've got like one unit. There's 2 firefighters and 1 social worker. What can you tell us? What's in the budget for Seattle Fire Department?
Yeah, Health One is certainly a big thing. So they have 2 Health One units now, and this is something that started a couple of years ago, basically out of Chief Scoggins and some other folks at the fire department doing some analysis and realizing that all those times during the day where you hear fire engines going up and down 3rd Avenue downtown, right? They're rolling to people in crisis, having a medical crisis along there, and most of the time it's what they were calling sort of low acuity crises, right? Where they need a little bit of medical help, but not necessarily like a big fire engine roll from one of the fire stations. But the fire department didn't really have anything that could handle that really well. So they created this new Health One sort of mobile health unit that could actually go out on those kinds of calls and deal with them in a way that's more economical and just provide better service for those, and also potentially include other kinds of workers, like a mental health worker or a social worker, who could, sort of expand the kind of help that they could offer to somebody, potentially, a homeless person, having a medical crisis there, and really just get them to the place that they need to be from there. It's currently at 2 units, and so this would add a 3rd unit. And their hope is that over time they'll be able to offer this kind of service, around the city, and not just kind of in the core areas of the city where there are larger homeless populations during the day. And they think that'll make a big difference. So the program has been a huge success. Even just, financially, it actually saves some money, right? It saves the fire department money to do this, while also providing better service to the people who need this. Erica, you might have some thoughts on this.
Oh, I was going to say real quick,
Omari.
Erica. I was going to tell you that, usually anytime I got a guest from the city on my show, I get flamed on Twitter. You know what I'm saying? Oh, you're platforming this person, doing it. Chief Scoggins was the first person. There was a guest on the Morning Update show where it was like all up. So anyway, that being said, what were we saying, Eric?
I like him. He's a great guy.
Oh, it's so funny. Yeah, as I said early on in one of those press conferences where, Chief Best would get up, former Chief Best, and the mayor, and then Chief Scoggins, and it was always the 3 of them. And I said Scoggins always looks like he has the look of a guy who knows he's not going to be quoted because nobody's mad at him. Besides the health one thing that the council is adding, and that they talked about today, is restoring a cut in the mayor's budget that would have essentially cut funding to recruit people, because it's not just SPD that's seeing a lot of people leaving and a lot of reduction through attrition. People are leaving the fire department too, and they perform obviously a really critical public safety role, not just in those low acuity calls, but in the high acuity calls, I guess they would be called as well. And so, you get past a certain point and, you really do have, unlike with police, I think, who have a different staffing model, you do get to a point where, you're not performing your public safety mandate as well anymore. So, so they're gonna invest some more in actually trying to recruit more firefighters, which I didn't realize that the mayor had proposed cutting that, and I was kind of surprised. But it sounds like that's gonna get back in there.
Yeah, it's a great thing, and one of the big reasons for attrition in fire department is they're just looking at an enormous number of retirements from the fire department over the next couple of years, right? So it's good that they're going to sort of stay consistent on continuing to recruit, because they will continue to have just a steady stream of people going out.
One thing that'd be interesting, and maybe Mike, I don't know, you still got all your hair, so I don't think you're as old as me. But back when I was a kid here in Seattle, the big deal, it was the Black Fireman's Ball. That was the biggest black formal event in the city of Seattle. And that'll tell you how many black firemen there were in the city of Seattle. I only bring that up because you said recruitment. And like what happened is most of those black firemen ended up retiring. They stayed here, and the flow of black firefighters was never really replenished in the city of Seattle, although we do have the black fire chief and Chief Scoggins. But when I was a kid, that was a big deal, the Black Fireman's Ball. And like I said, that to tell you how many there really were working within the fire department. So, I don't know why. I don't want to assume here on this show why those numbers dropped. I know that a lot of people retired, but it'd be interesting if they're going to be recruiting to see if there's more black firefighters or firefighters of color entering the Seattle Fire Department. Any thoughts on that? No? Good. I guess we're right. Everybody's like, yeah, bring back. Everybody loves ready to go to the ball. He's like, what?
I never heard of the ball, but I know that my dad was almost a firefighter for the city of Seattle. He got really close and ended up taking a different city job instead. But there was a time when I think it was clear that there were a lot more black firefighters intentionally in our city.
Yeah, no, it was this was back in the day. I'm gonna see if I can pull up some images there of that. Okay, so now we move closer to some hot button issues here. And we'll throw this one out to you here, Kevin, and you can break it down. Seattle SPD, Seattle Police Department, and Community Safety.
Oh boy. Okay, here we go. So there's, coming into this budget process, there was really two parts, right? One was the mayor and the council have been talking about, are there functions in SPD that are really civilian units that don't need to be in SPD, such as the parking enforcement officers and the 911 call center. And so the mayor's budget proposed sort of moving some of those groups out, into different places. She wanted to move the parking enforcement officers into SDOT and set up a new, a new center that had the 911 call center and the Office of Emergency Management. And that would sort of just move a bunch of headcount out of SPD into sort of other parts of the city government. The city council has largely gone along with that, and they had some different ideas about what groups should be together in a sort of new department and where different parts should go. So they want to see the parking enforcement officers and the 911 call center go into a new community safety and communications center. And the parking enforcement officers, as part of this, have been saying very clearly, hey, we'd love to do more than just parking enforcement. We think we could do, traffic enforcement at sports events. And, there are a whole bunch of other things we could do. We'd love to sort of broaden our charter. There's labor negotiations for each of these groups. One of the ideas that the city council has been looking at is moving the community service officer program out of SPD, also into this new, all civilian organization, which over time could expand to include new functions potentially if we think, the various groups, community-led groups looking at alternatives to policing, think that there are some additional functions that the city should actually staff. That'd be a place for those to land. So altogether, in looking at the Councilmember Mosqueda's balancing package, in the end, they really haven't gone that far away from what the mayor was proposing in terms of these kinds of groups to move out of SPD. It's largely about the same groups, but where it gets really interesting when they start looking at sort of attrition within SPD. And it's been a really funny year for SPD with this, because when COVID started at the beginning of the year, like back in February, March, attrition dropped to zero for the department, right? They were probably for the first time in 10 years fully staffed, because they had been aggressively recruiting, because they'd had a bunch of attrition last year and the year before. And then suddenly attrition went to zero. Everybody was staying and they managed to get fully staffed. And then in September, after all the stuff that happened over the summer, attrition just spiked. In the last couple of months, they've had an enormous number of people leaving the department. And just in the last couple of weeks, with the latest updates that they have on the number of departures that they've had from the department, the SPD has redone its staffing, and the council was talking a little bit about this earlier today. And they think, based upon their most optimistic views of how many people they can hire next year, if they're actually allowed to hire, they would still end up, with attrition and the hiring that they could do, kind of moving from the mid 1400s of sworn officers this year to the low 1300s next year, right? Now, in large organizations, I'm going to get really nerdy for a second here. In large organizations, I used to work in a big, large tech company here in Seattle, but city governments and county governments are the same way. Hiring somebody is this weird thing, because you need two things to hire somebody. You need budget to pay them, and you need to have what's called a position authority or a head count or something like this, right? So every department has a number they're given that says you can have this number of people, and they're given a budget of dollars saying, here's the money you have to pay them. And if you want to hire somebody, you need one of the people and enough money to pay them, right? And if you don't have either one of those, you can't hire them. So what's happened this year with the attrition is they've got a bunch, the number of people they have is way below their position authority, the number of people they're allowed to have. And they've had a bunch of extra money that they've saved because of people who've left that they didn't have to pay for the full year. Now, when an organization hires somebody, there's this thing called a bow wave, which says, okay, if I hire somebody mid-year this year, I only have to pay them for half of the year this year. But I need to remember that next year I'm going to have to budget for a full year for them. I'm going to have to spend way more on that person next year than I do this year. But attrition works the other way, right? Where if somebody leaves in the middle of this year, I save a little bit of money because I didn't have to pay them full salary this year. But next year, I don't have to pay them anything. I get to save basically a whole year's worth of salary for them. So what the mayor did in her budget was she said, okay, I'm going to recognize that we can save some money on budget, but I'm not going to change the position authority for SPD. And then what the city council has come in and done in this balancing package is they said, all those open headcount you have, based upon what you think you're going to be able to sort of hire back to next year, given continued attrition and your hiring ability, everything above that, we're just going to take back, right? So you're not going to have an opportunity to hire above, this low 1300s number. And all the savings, not only from salary, but from overtime for having fewer people, from training and travel and all the other equipment budgets and everything else that goes along with hiring people, all the savings you're going to have because you're going to have fewer people, we're going to take all that back too. So they clawed back just a ton of money and all the extra headcount from SPD. In the end, none of that really changes the number of people that SPD has. The city council said, okay, on top of that, we're still going to ask you to lay off 35 people, hopefully out of order. So we can maintain as much diversity in the SPD sworn officers as possible.
So real quick here.
Yeah.
So what happened? It was a lot of noise, and you're right. You've broken it all the way down, Kevin.
I did the noise thing. It's okay.
No, it's good. People appreciate that though. But there was a lot of noise when they ended the last budget and going into this one. It's like all this momentum on defund and everything else. Did anything kind of get defunded, or is it like intentionally defunded? Like we're taking this money, or is it like a roundabout kind of defund? Is defund off the table? Is it like where is that in this? And was that even in any of these conversations?
Yeah, and it came up explicitly a couple times today. Councilmember Wara said, used a line that she's used a few times before, which says, we're working off of a plan and not a percentage, right? She in particular is really focused on not trying to hit a 50% number or any other particular percentage number of shrinking the organization, but of having a plan for better ways to handle a lot of things that we're asking the police to do today, and making sure that alongside of cuts in SPD, and in fact, before there are cuts in SPD, that there are organizations placed that can pick up that slack and really, take care of those responsibilities. Erica, you might, I know you were listening all day today too, so you might have some interesting observations on this.
Yeah, I thought so. I think Omari, you bring up a really good point. Like, are they actually cutting? And I think the answer, for the most part, unless you count those 35 positions that they're hoping to cut through layoffs, the answer is kind of not really. I worry that the strategy here, because I don't think that this is really a strategy, is to just sort of allow the numbers to continue to fall through attrition, and then what they do is they abrogate those positions, which means they basically, instead of the positions just sitting there unfilled and waiting to be filled, they just get rid of the position authority, so you can't hire people back to replace those people. Well, okay, but if this is just random attrition and that's going to be the strategy, does that mean that we're getting a better police force? Does it mean that we are getting a police force that has better policies, that is more racially diverse, that is more gender diverse, that just all the things that we say we want if we're going to maintain some kind of police force? And the other thing is, if you're somebody who wants a 50% cut, this is not a 50% cut. It is a reduction of about 20% overall. So the balancing of those cuts is supposed to be all the spending that they're doing on things like participatory budgeting and on whatever community organizations get funded out of that. They're putting aside money, I think $18 million for community led efforts to to replace some police functions. And, and like Kevin said, they're moving a bunch of stuff out of the police department, and they're putting more money into the human services department, things like that. But I mean, my question is, is this really a balancing package, or is it sort of saying, we're not going to really do that much with SPD, but we're going to fund all this other stuff, so maybe you won't notice. And that is a very cynical take, and I'm putting it out there as a devil's advocate position a little bit, but I do sort of wonder, when the conversation about the budget has not really centered on this idea of cutting the police force, it's kind of shifted over to, well, okay, the mayor put this $100 million in here, and we're going to claw a bunch of that back. And where are we going to put that money? And it's all still for BIPOC communities. And so the mayor says this is great. The city council says this is great. They're all in agreement. And it's like, well, okay, but what about over here where, you all said you were going to cut the police department? Are you still doing that?
Yeah.
Right. And Mike, let me throw over to Mike Davis real quick. Mike, protesters are still in the streets, and I was with them the other night, and they were like 50%. Actually, they say 100% now, but some protests, they say 50% at least. I mean, they're in the streets, and they're looking. I think they're looking for a defund in the percentage as opposed to the plan, which Councilmember Juarez talked about. The people who are out there, pushing this defund and protesting and everything. They're looking for a percentage, something that's kind of tangible. It looks like there's things happening over there, but how does this translate to the streets, Mike Davis?
It falls short of everything that was asked for by protesters in the streets. They didn't defund by 50%. And the way that they arrived at their 20%, I wouldn't go as far as to call it disingenuous, but I would say it was extremely easy. If we're talking about funds that were being unspent coming back, if we're talking about attrition, if we're talking about positions that are vacant not being refilled, you didn't defund anything. These are things that were naturally happening. And what I feel like their plan is by doing this, they can say we defunded by 20% and we're doing this for BIPOC community over here. So hopefully people will forget and time will pass and then they can move past this. But even when we look at the money that's supposed to go to BIPOC communities, it was supposed to be $100 million. Now we're talking about $30 million from the mayor, $30 million from city council. Where's our other $40 million? And if we're $40 million short of the promise to the community, then why won't we defund the police? So we left their budget inflated. We shortcut the community. We didn't get any significant level of reform. People are still getting beat down in the streets. We're still seeing people being hospitalized on camera. So what did they actually do for the community?
So Kevin Schofield, to you, why did the city council, who just a few months ago was sounds like receptive and everything to what the streets were saying, especially around defund, or at least posturing around wanting to defund, or putting up these proposals that very well might not pass, but it was a lot of they at least acted like this is what they wanted to do. It seems like right here it just struck a deal. Is there a flip side of this deal somewhere for city council?
Yeah, I think the flip side of the deal is the part we're still going to come to, which is the money they take away from the mayor's Equitable Communities Initiative and other money they're putting into BIPOC communities, and they restored a bunch of the funding to community-based organizations that the mayor had cut in the 2020 budget, including the $30 million from the Mercer Mega Block, $10 million that's supposed to immediately go out to develop community-based safety solutions. So, and we're going to get to all that. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves on that.
Right. Well,
so I think for the council, I think the most generous interpretation, coming back to the great point Erica made about, sort of downsizing by attrition and the dangers of doing that. The most generous interpretation you can say of that is they're saying, well, optimistically, we hope we can get these other community-based programs in place quickly. And so we don't want SPD hiring back, refilling positions right now that we just turn around and lay off again, right? So that's probably the most generous thing you can say about that. I think the most generous thing you can say sort of in general about the approach here is that they're worried about sequencing, that they don't want to cut SPD so quickly at a time when, there are, many parts of the city that are seeing, rises in, at the very least, property crime, if not other kinds of crime as well. And they're getting an earful about that as well, right? So, they're trying to make sure that, when they do cut SPD, there are organizations in place that can really pick up those responsibilities and do the right thing. And it's hard to look around right now and say that those organizations are ready to go with that. And, that's a big risk, right? Because, that plan may not work, right? The sequencing could get off. It could take longer to grow the capacities of other organizations. They may not get the funding that they need. To Mike's great point on this, it all may take long enough that, everybody forgets and moves on, right?
Well,
the next to funding the West Seattle Bridge replacement or, some other big cost item in the city, right?
Well, speaking of people forgetting and moving on, Erica, a lot, you also have your finger on the pulse on like what's going on in protest and things like that. I mean, how does this deal here, how do you think this is going to translate to the street, to the protests, to the people who are pushing defund and other things?
I mean, I wouldn't say I have my finger on the pulse. That would be my wonderful reporter, Paul Kiefer, who reports on police accountability and protest and all that stuff. But I mean, I will just say, I mean, it is pretty transparent from looking at this budget that it does not do what protesters are asking for. And I don't think anybody's going to be fooled by it into thinking, well, They gave us, I mean, because I think we were seeing this before when the mayor proposed this $100 million fund, when she said, well, I mean, essentially that what the protesters are just ignoring is that I gave them $100 million. And I think, I don't think people bought that at the time. And I don't think people are going to buy a 20% cut when people are demanding 50%. Now, whether it is actionable to cut 50% of the police budget right now and replace it with things that haven't been stood up yet quite is another question. But I do think, I mean, it feels a little bit like the air has been let out of the conversation a little bit. I mean, you don't hear people at council sort of, banging their fists and saying we're cutting SPD. You hear them banging their fists and saying we are taking back this money that the mayor wanted to spend how she wanted to spend it. Because remember, that $100 million fund was incredibly controversial because the way that the mayor planned to spend it and now plans to spend the $30 million that she has left is with this this task force that she's going to appoint, and that a lot of the folks who are more grassroots, like King County Equity Now, declined to participate in. So it's a lot of people who are kind of already community leaders and people with access to power and things like that. So anyway, so they're sort of pointing to that and saying, well, we got this back, here you go. And they're giving a lot of it to this participatory budgeting process. And, I really want to see what results that produces. Because, in the meantime, I mean, they're not substantially making hard or controversial cuts to the police. They're doing something that, even the mayor, who was very opposed to their initial talk about cutting the police force by 50%. I mean, even the mayor today said, I think it's great. So, whenever you have the mayor and the council say, I think it's great, simultaneously, like that's something to kind of interrogate and say, well, why is that? So again, not to be like the most cynical person on this call, but it does kind of make me raise my eyebrows a little bit when I hear everybody kind of agreeing and patting each other on the back.
Right, Mike Davis, I'll give you the last word in this segment.
I would say there's no way you could be more cynical than me. I think the mayor is
fair enough.
Smiling cheek to cheek today because this was a major victory for her. I feel like she pulled one over on us all. She didn't have to defund SPD. She has her hands clean with the remaining 30 million because of, and we'll talk about it, but all of the things that council tied into how that money can be spent. Now, if it goes wrong, she can say, oh, well, it's council. But if it goes right, she can say, yay, me. So at the end of the day, we got hoodwinked.
Hoodwinks, and that's one I haven't heard in a while. Sham Shuckle, run amok, let it stray. We're gonna take a short break right now, and man, this is what everybody's been waiting for: this discussion about the 100 million.
We're right here at East Precinct. It doesn't get any closer than this right now.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. As a small independent media company, we rely on the financial support of individuals and business members to stay on the front lines of the news that's important to you. All right, welcome back to City of Seattle Budget Update Show. I'm joined by Erica C. Barnett from publiccola.com, Kevin Schofield from SCCinsight.com, and Money Mike Davis from the South Seattle Emerald. This is what we're all want to talk about here. And they programmed it. Man, Bobby, I should have used your sound effects. Here it is. BIPOC community and community safety investments. Kevin Schofield, take it away.
Yeah, so the mayor proposed in her budget $100 million for what she called the Equitable Communities Initiative, where she set up a task force of folks to sort of make some recommendations to how that money would be spent. And it was really interesting, as I mentioned earlier, a couple weeks ago when the council started discussing all this, they actually proposed cutting about $10 million. And I thought that was pretty light at the time. It'd be interesting to see whether that really stood. And it didn't stand. And so what they announced this week in their balancing package is cutting that by $70 million down to $30 million. And and part of the context here is obviously understanding, well, so then what did the council do with that money? And they did a bunch, $70 million is a lot of money, and they actually did a lot of things with it. One is they put some of the money back into the city's reserves, emergency reserve funds, which the mayor's budget almost completely depleted. And so that's, probably a good thing longer term. The other really important thing is that, we have to recognize that the mayor basically cut a number of, community connected program funding in the 2020 budget, including $30 million of money that came out of the Mercer Megablock sale proceeds that was supposed to be invested into fighting displacement and underserved communities. There was $750,000 for a rapid rehousing program and $650,000 for another program. There was $13 million that the council had set out over the summer to immediately invest in community-based, safety programs. That the mayor came back after they got done, vetoing and overriding the veto. The mayor said, "Okay, I like the idea of spending all 13 million of that, but I think I can only spend 3 million of it this year. So we'll push the other 10 million into 2021. And oh, by the way, I'm not actually going to cover that with funding. So the council is going to have to find $10 million to do that." So what the council came and said, okay, we're going to, in part of cutting the $70 million, we're going to completely refund the $30 million from the Mercer Megablock, displacement fund. We're going to, fund these other little programs that you cut. We're going to fund that $10 million out of the $13 million. So we're going to cover all that stuff from the 2020 stuff that the mayor cut the funding for. We're going to put that all back. So that all comes back in. And they said, so the mayor's got $30 million, we leave $30 million in her Equitable Communities Initiative. We're going to fund $30 million for our participatory budgeting process that will run in parallel with that. 18 million of that will come from the mayor's $100 million. And the other $12 million will come from the cuts to SPD. So now, where it ended up with is going into 2021, there's the mayor's $30 million investment through, her ECI. There's the council's $30 million participatory budgeting process, which, hopefully will have similar outcomes. And then the last thing they did with this was they stuck a proviso. They stuck a set of rules on the mayor's Equitable Community Initiative, $30 million, saying you can't spend any of that $30 million until you come back and show us a plan for how you're going to spend it that's aligned with the recommendations from the participatory budgeting process. And I kind of got in Councilmember Mosqueda's face about this when we were kind of going over this, saying, doesn't that really mean that the mayor can't do anything with that until the participatory budgeting process is done and has the recommendations? And she kind of said, well, I think they're going to run in parallel, and I don't think it's really good. I don't think that, it's a requirement that the participatory budgeting process gets done first. But, personally, this is me talking now, Kevin. I think it's either one of two things is going to happen. Either the participatory budgeting process is going to have to run its course first, and then we'll get to see what the mayor and our task force get to do. Or over the next few weeks, they're going to figure out how to just merge these things. And I think the latter is the better solution. That they just need to figure out how to put these things together, because running the two of them in parallel, it just doesn't make any sense to do that, right?
Seems pretty likely, though, that, based on the mayor's comments today, and I don't know, maybe Kevin, maybe you know more about this than I do, but it just that how would that even work? Would that mean merging the $30 million and the $18 million and then putting all of that into the participatory budgeting, pocket? That's kind of the last thing that the mayor has to kind of cling to in a way. Yeah. And your point about timing is really right on and really interesting, that the plan does seem to be to let this process play out, and who knows how long they're going to give the process and what it's going to produce in the end. But there has been a long history on the council, and not just the council, but in the city, and in cities across the country, frankly, of not taking participatory budgeting processes all that seriously. And part of that is the way that they're typically set up. And that is to sort of go out to people and ask them, to take votes on a predetermined list of issues. And I'm not saying this is how this process is going to go. I'm just saying this is the historic kind of way it works. And people, say, oh, I really care about trees. I really care about homelessness. I don't want more cops, whatever. And then the council or the city takes that and does something with it, theoretically. And then that's kind of called participatory or input from the community. And, that could be how this process goes. Hopefully it'll be a little more genuine than that, but it's a little hard for me to see the mayor, who has been incredibly skeptical of that process to begin with, I think, sort of ceding that $30 million and saying, well, let's just dump it all into this one process that I didn't want to begin with. But I don't know, Kevin, are you hearing something different? I was on your reporting here.
I was really surprised. I haven't been checking my sources the last 24 hours from, inside City Hall, and Erica, you definitely have better sources in City Hall than I do these days. But I was just shocked when I saw the mayor's press release that came out about half an hour after the council's balancing package was released, that had, this huge cut to her signature effort, right? And she basically said, yeah, I'm good with that. And, but we have to put this in sort of the larger context that, over the last month or so, they've come to agreement on the navigation team replacement. They've come to agreement last week on how they're going to approach the next round of SPOG negotiations, right? Where the council is going to have a seat at the table, and the accountability organizations are going to be deeply involved with it. So there's the mayor and the city council seem to be playing nice. And it may just be that they figured out that all their political futures, are tied together and figuring out how to play nice on this. And while I think Erica is very right that, they both have, vested interests in getting their way on this, I wouldn't take anything off the table right now. I think it's very possible they actually sit down and find a compromise on this, because it's going to look silly running these two things in parallel.
Mike Davis, and you chomping at the bit.
It's going to look silly, and it's exactly what they're going to do. There's no way that the mayor gives this thing up. I think the reason why the mayor was so happy when she put out that press release is because now she has less accountability to the whole process. When you read through that specific language of how her task force has to wait for that authoritative body to give them the green light on doing anything, now basically it's like the council has to approve them before they jump on anything. So when they finally do jump, if they ever jump, if anything goes south, she has somebody that can take the blame. Now, if things go great and it's a win, then it's yay me. But either way it goes in this scenario, the mayor can't lose. So I don't really see her giving this up. She also won because she didn't have to cut the police in this whole entire process. And one thing that sticks out to me, And I know I'm going back to ancient history here, but I still remember the days when the mayor promised 100 million to the Black community. And somehow that turned into 100 million BIPOC. And now it's turned into 30 million over here and 30 million over there. So I'm skeptical of the process as a whole. And last point, I think what Erica said was interesting about how the participatory budget works, because that sounds to me exactly like how this task force is supposed to work. You have a body of hand-selected people by the mayor whose only job is to identify areas of budget where money will be allocated. And it's still not even clear how the actual allocation was supposed to happen. So where is the participation? Where is the real community input?
Yeah. So last week,
go ahead, Kevin.
The King County Equity Now and the Black Brilliance Project, submitted a set of preliminary recommendations to the city council to kind of for the 2021 budget. And, I read a little article about this, and, it reads like a piece of qualitative research, which is fine. It's not quantitative. And, certainly in social sciences, it's, well-established practice to go, do qualitative research, get a bunch of ideas and thoughts and kind of the general gist of what people think, and then use that to kind of lead to the questions that you really want to do more quantitative research. And so if you think of something like the participatory budgeting process, where you put a bunch of things in front of people and ask them to vote on them as sort of the ultimate quantitative research, right? You're going to get a bunch of people to literally vote on the things that they think are important. That process may work out okay, but I think there's still some legitimate questions that need to be asked right now about, like, the Black Brilliance Project, who exactly are they asking, and who are the people that are going out and asking the questions? And, are there opportunities for them to put their thumb on the scale on this? Or do we, what level of confidence do we really feel that the results that they're bringing back are genuinely represent the issues that are that the community is thinking about, right? There's a level of transparency that we don't quite have yet that I hope we get to see over the next few weeks. Right?
Well, let me jump in here. So a few things that I do know, right, is that the mayor, at least in the comments, I haven't been on City Hall in the last week, but I know that previously when we talked about the 100 million, when the mayor was on the morning update show, and when we did the town hall with the mayor didn't necessarily say that she was opposed to participatory budget. She said that she was opposed to the whole 100 million going in participatory, and actually a percentage of her original plan was supposed to be in participatory budgeting. The city does do some participatory budgeting right now in neighborhoods department. It's not huge amounts. It's like $1 million to $3 million. It's huge for me, by the way. Donate if you can. But so 1 to 3 million is kind of what they're doing over there in participatory. I think, to be honest with you, right, I don't know if the mayor planned it like this or it just worked out. And sometimes they say it's better to be lucky than good. And so maybe it was planned this way, maybe it wasn't. But the mayor is able to say, like, hey, I promised 100 million, 100 million is delivered. And the mayor is also able to sit back and say, you know what? Me exercising leadership and listening to my council and everything else, they came back and they said that they have ideas for this 100 million. And hey, I'm ready to go and work with them in furthering getting the process moving forward for Black people, BIPOC people. And now, by the way, I've transferred the responsibility of all of these kind of things. It's almost like be careful what you wish for, because the mayor, 1 week ago, it was this privileged white woman is telling BIPOC people how to spend their money. 1 week later, it's now this BIPOC city council who's sitting there responsible for where all this money goes. Because even the 30 million that sits there with the mayor still has to align with participatory budget. And so now all the fingers that was pointing at the mayor, like, oh, you're this privileged white woman, this and that, it's now on the council. And so now the council is really in the hot seat to deliver. So the mayor might have just been able a way to finagle her way out of something, still say that she kept 100 million, not defund the police, and have everybody feeling happy about themselves. I don't know, is it lucky, good, or am I reading it wrong?
Well, it's interesting. Last week, I was talking to the mayor's spokeswoman, and and they were saying, I mean, I couldn't quote the whole thing in the piece, but I mean, they were saying that the way that the city council was planning to spend the money was, with the jumpstart tax, which if you recall, the money, the $100 million came out of sort of taking away this funding that was going to go to initially direct COVID relief and then to homelessness and housing programs. And the mayor essentially distributed that money throughout her budget, and the $100 million came from that. Okay. So, I said, well, and I was asking the mayor's office about that, and they said, well, did that go through any kind of racial equity toolkit? Did they do any process on that? Do we have any idea, where any of their whether any of their priorities are the priorities that community wants? And this was in the context of me kind of asking about whether they had done any racial equity analysis on their own proposals. But they were very defensive, and this is my point. They were really defensive about it. And now, a week later, they've completely switched positions for whatever reason. I do think one reason that I was surprised initially by the mayor sort of saying this is great and we're happy that this money is going to BIPOC communities in some way. But then, I thought about it, and it is true that, not only does this shift responsibility to the city council, but it also, again, takes attention away from, well, what are you doing about policing? And I think also the other thing we can't discount is that it's an election year next year. We don't know whether the mayor's going to run again. I mean, this could be seen as a sign that she's just done. I mean, that's one theory. She's just kind of like, okay, fine, whatever, you win. Or it could be seen as a sign that, she sees that the political winds are not blowing her way, or were not blowing her way, and that she was getting a lot of blowback on her proposal. And so she's going the other way. Maybe she's making these decisions out of, pure policy reasons or pure philosophical reasons, but you can never discount politics, especially in an election year.
Mike Davis, you're good at reading signs and tea leaves. What signs are you seeing here?
I think Erica's right on the money. I think, especially with Joe Biden potentially winning, the mayor could be looking like to make a jump anyway. I had read in the Seattle Times a while back that there had been some rumors that if Joe Biden wins, then the mayor could potentially get a federal position. So if that's what she's angling for anyway, then maybe she's just done playing the game. But I have to go back to what Omari said, and I think you hit it on the money. I think that she just kind of backed herself into a win-win situation where she doesn't have to defund, money's going out to the community, and she doesn't have to be the one that's directly responsible, because the number one thing the mayor needs right now is to take that spotlight off of herself and point that thing at city council. And that's what she walked into with this situation.
Yeah, you were saying, Kevin?
What was I saying? Let's not forget that the mayor isn't the only one up for election next year, right? Councilmember Mosqueda, the budget chair, is also up for re-election next year, or she too may decide to do something different. And the council president Gonzalez is also up for election next year. So that all kind of fills into this mix as well. But to the points that both Erica and Mike have made. Yeah, I guess I'm of the view that this isn't one thing, right? That there's probably a mix of motives to go into it. The politics is certainly a part of it. Being able to, check up a couple boxes and say, yeah, we did get a bunch of money out to BIPOC community. I think the policing thing is difficult. I mean, you can look at the policing thing in Seattle as a whole as a lose-lose, right? If they do a drastic cut to SPD, they lose. With one part of the community. If they don't, they lose with another part of the community, right? So it may be that they just, decided that, that they were really going to try to sequence this the right way, and at least have a coherent explanation that they could give to people about what they're doing. But I could be wrong about all that too.
I would say this is that I think it's going to be interesting, right, to see what these community organizations, especially some of them that very well might benefit from tens of millions of dollars that is outlined in this budget, if they stay on the same message. if this message continues, if it's the same message of, recall or Durkin resign or this or that, or, defund SPD and all these things, or if it's now like, okay, if they're already part of the grand compromise. I think that's the big question to be asked here. Because, a lot of this is being driven initially by the streets and then amplified by different organizations and everything else. I tell you this, is just the people who are committed on the streets, they're not going anywhere. But the people above the streets are these different organizations that we've seen a lot of and heard a lot of. Be interesting to hear what their positions are. Maybe I can get some of them on the morning show tomorrow. Do they still feel the same way now that City Council has come in here on this $100 million? But before, I know one of the things that Sean Good said was that the $100 million was like, a fake Rolex because of the way that it was being distributed and some everything else. Now are people more apt to the process? Is the mayor no longer a factor in this argument because they're like, oh, okay, well, man, this $100 million is now basically going to come out the way that these community groups might not exactly how they wanted it, but definitely better than the way that the mayor proposed. What are your thoughts, Mike Davis?
Well, I think right now, a lot of those organizations' focus is going to be forced to shift on the actual money. I mean, there's 30 million on each side that is going to go to the community if we are to believe what we've been told. So the number one thing that these organizations have to do right now is figure out how they can be a part of that participatory budget system so that they can get their hands on those funds. And I guess the mayor's task force will get to work on the other side, and hopefully these organizations will be able to play one side of the fence and actually get themselves to the funds.
Erica Barnett?
I lost my train of thought. Sorry, what was your question? It was about.
Well, I'm just like, so.
The
question is that the streets, the people, and when I say the streets, the people who are literally in the street, man, they want to see major percentages and a real kind of defund. So I'm assuming that they're not really going anywhere. But above the streets, there's a lot of organizations that, that have been pushing for different things. They're pushing for defund, pushing for the mayor to resign, pushing for the $100 million to be participatory and all these other things. Now that this money looks like it's going to come out in a way that a lot of these community groups that we've heard from is more advantageous to them, do you think that groups are going to still stay on that messaging, or like what Mike Davis says, they're going to focus on the money?
Well, yeah. So I think that, again, looking at this from the most cynical possible point of view, I think that would be the hope probably of somebody who wanted the protests to end and who wanted and not just, and absolutely, Omari, I hear what you're saying. They're not going anywhere. But if you're a politician and you're thinking, God, like, let's just give them something, this might be the hope. That maybe this will be like cause a little bit of a conciliatory mood, but I think one thing that that I know I forget about sometimes is that there is this whole other part of Seattle out there that is manifested in things like this Downtown Seattle Association poll that is saying, people are just really upset about, not enough cops on the streets, and, look at all these tents everywhere, and we've got to do something. And that is funding another recall movement, which is the Recall Shamasawant movement, which is still moving forward. And so if you're a politician, and if you're a citywide politician, such as the mayor, you are listening to those groups too. And so there's like this push and pull where I think that the council really is, really was moved. And I said this to you before when I was on the show. I think that this is, this has been an example where the council and the mayor have been genuinely affected by what is happening on the streets, and have been genuinely moved by the protests, and their positions have moved, I think more dramatically than we might realize. But at the same time, there are also politicians who need to get elected, and to get money, there's this whole other, part of Seattle that you need to at least listen to. And so I think there's just a real push and pull happening right now. And I think when you look at numbers like this poll that say that people are really upset about, quote unquote street disorder and significant defunding of police is the way they put it. People saying that they don't want that. If you're a citywide politician, particularly, you're listening to that too.
Right. And before I hop over to you, Kevin Schofield, and this was something, I'll put this back up here. I happen to have something handy in my system. We talked about this morning. This was some research done by EMC, and I think it was districts 1, 2, 6, and 7. I know that District 3 wasn't on there. But when you talk about the rest of Seattle, and so, sometimes, of course, with this issue, we're talking about a certain community in Seattle. But when you looked at this, and I pointed this out to Trey Holiday, of course, the homelessness at 45%, police brutality and defund the police, 19% as far as frustrated or concerns, and inequity, social justice, Black Lives Matter is at 10%. Now, maybe if you included District 3, you might have more of a skew there with the Central District and Capitol Hill. But this is interesting because it didn't include District 3, right? It took a lot of people that we would assume that probably would boost the numbers around inequity, Black Lives Matter, and police brutality. So they're not really, that district isn't included here. And it shows you, at least according to this polling, that a lot of Seattle isn't necessarily concerned with these issues that we're sitting here talking about tonight. Your thoughts, Kevin Schofield?
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of problems with polls, and one of the disciplines I try to keep is when I look at something like that, and I quickly find out that there are methodological errors with it. My internal rule is I stop looking at it, rather than trying to sort of keep peeking at it and tease out some little nugget worth talking about. So I quickly discounted it. It's clear that it was done with an agenda. It's clear that they cherry picked. To your point of they didn't poll District 3, right? They had a specific audience they were going after, and so to me, I don't even know what you can draw from that, and I'm not going to try to draw from that. But I think coming back to kind of the earlier point we were talking about, money changes the politics in this city a lot, right? And now there's a lot of money on the table with this, and Erica and I and Mike have seen this a lot. Certainly, Erica and I have written a lot about this around just the human service providers in this city, right? And the relationship with the city council, and and just seeing that, particularly this time of year during budget season, the organizations that show up to the public comment sessions, and you can see them, signing in on the city council's, visitor log, who's going and talking to the city council members behind the scenes, who's, thanking them and begging them for money in public. The money on the table absolutely affects the politics in the city. And we are undoubtedly going to see that with this process as well. And at some point, somebody has to break the news to whatever organization ends up actually facilitating the participatory budgeting process that they're not going to be eligible for the money, right? And that's going to be a tough conversation for them, right? This whole decision-making process about who gets to decide who gets the money is a little political now, and it's going to get a lot political before it's done.
Is that why the mayor, like I said, the mayor's move was smart? Because at this point, the mayor's like, hey, council, you guys know best. You move with it, because it has the potential of becoming very political.
Yeah, and one of the other factors in the mayor's mind may just be like, I've got 3 or 4 other city-wide emergencies I have to go deal with, right? Why am I, if the city council wants to own this and run with this one, yeah, that's cool. And so, everything you guys said could absolutely be true, that she ends up getting credit for, potentially not doing any work for this at all, right? And that would be unfortunate if she got a bunch of credit for not doing any work around this. Whereas other organizations and council members who really do a lot of work, whoever ends up doing the work really ought to get the credit for it. But, divide and conquer is a valuable, approach to these sorts of things too. And if the mayor legitimately is thinking like, good, this means that I can go focus on sorting out the West Seattle Bridge and sorting out some of the issues, really kind of focusing more time of working with Chief Diaz and SPD on how do we really move forward and restructure SPD and all these other issues that we, COVID, figuring out what the hell we do about COVID. maybe that's for the better too.
Mike Davis, your eyes lit up there when you said divide and conquer. It's a word, it's a phrase we hear in our community a lot.
No, definitely. But I think I would go back to what Kevin said about the poll and how he discounted it. When I look at the poll, it kind of reminded me of, first and foremost, the demographics of Seattle. And I know that they left folks out, and that probably was intentional. But, sometimes I read the tea leaves and I go off intuition. When I look at the mayor and how she's handled all the situations that she's been in from the summer until now, it seems really clear to me that she's playing to a really specific base. And as far as like re-election, I don't believe that the mayor thinks that she needs those protesters to vote for her, because she's always had a very, very pro-police stance. She never wanted to defund, even when people were in Capitol Hill getting gassed in their homes. She had a really, really specific stance, and it seems to align with those folks in the North End who never really had to be a part of any of these things. Now, whether that will play out in her favor or not, time will tell. But I definitely think that she plays to her base, and she really looks at issues from a really, really specific perspective. And it's not the perspective of the people that you see protesting in the streets, the people that will definitely still be there after all this is said and done.
Right. Erica?
Well, I think two things. I think it is the nature of budgeting that, the city council takes credit for as much as it can and the mayor takes credit for as much as she can. And it was really interesting to hear her today saying that that she's glad. I think her exact quote to me was, she's glad that the city council has decided to follow her lead and allocate this $100 million. Which I just thought, wow, that was really masterful. Like, seriously? I think they'll try to take credit for the stuff that goes well and not take credit for the stuff that goes poorly. I do think on the poll, yes, it was a very misleading poll. The questions the three options that people had on the police questions were, essentially defund the police, significantly defund the police, or stay the same, or something like that. So but on the other hand, all polls tend to be like that. That's why politicians pay for them. They want to prove a point. Politicians and business groups. And I do think you can look within the poll and still, see the presence of people who feel a certain way that is not the way that, maybe you or I or protesters or Teresa Mosqueda or whoever feels about the way things are going in the city. And I just, just walking around the streets, I feel it. Like the downtown feels different. South Lake Soto feels different. My neighborhood feels different. There's just homelessness in particular. It's not that it's necessarily greater now, but the circumstances have made it visible. And to me, I see that and I think, like, well, God, like I'm sort of glad this is visible, because it proves that we need solutions that are actually lasting. And other people look at it and they say, this is horrible that it's visible, because it's visible and we need to make it invisible. And I'm just saying that is still a big faction in Seattle. And those are also the people that are going to be, deciding whether to vote for. Maybe that those folks will always vote for Jenny Durkin, but they're also going to be deciding whether to vote for Teresa Mosqueda or Lorena Gonzalez or whoever runs against them. And so if you're a politician and you want to stay a politician, you want to stay in office, you've got to factor in, whether and how much you want to listen to those people. And maybe the answer is not at all. I'm not a politician, because there's a lot of people I don't want to listen to, among a lot of other reasons. But if you want to stay in office, that is a consideration you have to take. And I wouldn't just totally discount that poll just because of some methodological problems.
And it certainly, those are great points. And the who you listen to is amplified in some ways by the district-based system, right? Because there are these very stark demographic differences between the districts in the city, and that means that the who constitutes somebody, a particular politician's base is very different for each of the politicians. But next year, the three elections are for, four if you include the city attorney, are all for citywide positions. There are no district-based positions up next year. And so that changes the dynamic of conversation that they need to have with the city and the people who live here.
All right. Hey, so before we get out of here, we'll go around the horn one more time. Any last final thoughts about this budget, the budget process, the mayor, anything else? Mike Davis, we'll start with you.
Short and sweet, man. The mayor played us. She got the upper hand. She did it. She's a lawyer. She knows how to maneuver. She made it through the summer, and I definitely believe that she's a monster. But she's good at those political maneuvers, and I think she wiggled her way out of this one.
Kevin Schofield.
I'd agree with Mike on that. I think the council and Councilmember Mosqueda are also very political, right? And there have been lots of rumors going around that the Councilmember Mosqueda may run for mayor next year. And
we asked her, she didn't necessarily say no when she was on the morning update show.
Yeah, I heard you ask her, and she evaded that question. So there's politics all around in this, and the city council and the mayor saying that a budget is a moral document, right? It's a statement of values. It's also a political document, right? And we're seeing that play out live right now.
Erica C. Barnett.
Well, I think one thing that we didn't get into specifically, but that hangs over the entire budget discussion and that's going to hang over the beginning of next year is the fact that, in the middle of this COVID crisis, we have an eviction moratorium that's going to end at some point. Right now, it's set to end December 31st. It'll probably get extended, but we are about to have, potentially an epic crisis, an exacerbated crisis on our hands of homelessness, of people, not able to pay rent, of, landlord-tenant disputes and landlords not being able to pay their mortgages. And I think that when that crisis sort of becomes more apparent, a lot of these other discussions may, I'm not going to say fall by the wayside, but, that's going to become a really, really present and, and huge issue that the city is going to have to address. And I kind of, there's a couple of things in the budget this year to help with legal aid for people who are going to get evicted, eviction defense, tenant education, things like that. But I feel like that is a huge issue that this budget, in large part kind of elides or ignores. There's funding for people experiencing homelessness, but there's not enough. And a lot of elements of this budget. I mean, even the fact that the mayor's proposal emptied out the reserve fund when next year is not going to necessarily be any better economically. I think we're just kind of kicking the can down the road. And last thing I'll say is this is a 1-year budget, which is the first time that the city has done that in my experience, and I think in modern history. And I think that may prove to be short-sighted because if the city's not looking at 2022, then there's going to be bills that come to due in just a year from now that the council is going to have to deal with, and the mayor or potentially a new mayor are going to have to deal with. So, more to come, I think, next year as we see the kind of fruits of the crisis continue to emerge.
The saga continues. I think that it's real interesting. That's why we did this show here tonight is because whether it's backroom wheeling and dealing or whether these things just kind of all fell into place, time will tell. I do think that the mayor, she's been able to navigate it. She's been able to navigate it. And sometimes they say, be careful what you wish for. And, the city council, they wanted it, they got it. And, what Kevin Schofield pointed out is what we talk about all the time is like the dollars on a ledger is one thing, but actually spending the money and this and that and processes and RFPs and this and that, and then you go participatory. We'll see how all of that plays out. But now the mayor is able to tell the county, hey, because even with her task force, the provision says that her task force, she can't even spend that $30 million until it's aligned somewhat with the participatory budgeting people. So now, I kind of get also what Kevin was saying is she's able to kind of put this issue like over here and deal with other issues that might be burning issues in the city for her, because that part is just about out of her hands if this all goes through. I want to say this though, is that, man, I think it's important that we continue to do what we've been doing, and that's watching City Hall from all of our different perspectives and vantage points. Before I get out of here, I want to thank Erica C. Barnett, publiccola.com. Go and check her out. Kevin Schofield, You know what you say, wordy and nerdy. You can check
Wordy
out
and
Kevin Schofield at sccinsight.com. Lots of information there. And Mike Davis, South Seattle Emerald, our partners over there at the Emerald. Want to thank all three of you guys for joining us tonight. And man, let's do this again too. Let's see, because we got to figure out, once all the shoes drop, we got to do a reunion show here so we can figure out what it was.
Thanks, so.
Yeah, you bet.
All right. See you next time.
Thanks, so.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your man, the Big O. Want to take a moment here, first of all, to say thank you for your support of Converge Media. We definitely wouldn't be here without you. Secondly, I want to thank everybody who is a supporter of Converge Media on Patreon. We definitely appreciate your support. And for those of you who might not know, I'll let you know, we operate 100% off of donations. Some donations big, most donations small, but we love all donations all the same. If you haven't done so yet, I want to encourage you to go on our website to whereweconverge.com/donate and subscribe. You click on the Patreon link and you can subscribe for as little as $5 a month. There's higher tiers beyond that as well. And just know that your subscription literally keeps us on the air. Once again, I want to thank you for all your support.